I think as organic growers, and irrespective of whether you're organic or conventional, we all need to agree that we need to feed the soil, and the soil feeds the crop, right? A brief snapshot of what agriculture is for the state of Iowa. It's a $30 billion industry. And if you split it into different commodities, it's plain blue and yellow most of the way. You can see half of it is from grains and oilseed and beans, that's soybean, about 49.6%, and corn here, and the other half is livestock and poultry products. So you might wonder, where is vegetable crop in there? So we are right here. We are not, it's difficult to see, but we are there. It's about 0.1%, but we are making progress. I mean, you talk about acreage for corn and soybean in Iowa, it's about 26 million acres. But for vegetables, it's about 7,500 acres. So small, but everybody needs to eat their vegetables and fruit, so there is hope. And we want to capitalize on that and keep growing some good fruits and vegetables. My research lab at Iowa State University primarily focuses on these areas. This is what my grad students and my extension program is about. We do a lot of work in conservation tillage. Cover crops is the central focus of my research. We do microbial stuff with the soil, row cover and integrated pest management. And I was talking to Don before this conference. He was talking about netting in high tunnels. So we do some of that work. Production of crops, and we are dabbling into grafting. We are seeing a big push towards grafting in Iowa too. We have some excellent soils, but if you grow tomatoes after tomatoes in a high tunnel for many years, you might want to think of strategies to avoid some of the soil-borne diseases. And of course, nutrient management is also in there. So I like this quote. This is a farmer from Iowa. I like the fact that he brought things to the middle. You know, there are two factions. One could be conventional and the other organic, but the basic premise is we need to be sustainable. And so sustainable agriculture is the shock absorber of the swinging pendulum. So I work with both organic growers, I work with conventional growers too, and try to see how can we incorporate certain practices that can make their production systems more sustainable. As a grower, you have to worry about markets. That's the number one thing. You need to identify the market first before you start growing your crop. You have to juggle the weather, biodiversity. I'll talk about that a little bit. With the cover crop aspect, crop rotation. I see the food safety folks back there, Justin from the Department of Ag. I mean, that's getting more and more important as production increases, pests and diseases, transplants, soil health, nutrient management. There are so many things that you need to juggle to make production sustainable and work. But today, I will focus more on cover crops, of how you can integrate cover crops and what type of cover crops into a vegetable production system, and what benefits advantages do they provide. So before even you get into cover crop, and this is the first thing we ask our growers, what do you want the cover crop to do for you? Because nowadays, with support from NRCS and USDA, there is equip dollars available to plant cover crops. But going into it, you should first know what do you actually want. Is soil organic matter something that you're looking for? Weed suppression is another thing. When you have a lot of organic matter, that helps to suppress weeds. And organic growers, you don't have many of those herbicides that pre-emergent or post-emergent to use in your production system. So you need to smother the weeds. So can you use certain cover crops that will help that? Now when we talk about organic matter here, I feel very blessed that we are in Iowa and our soils are very high in organic matter. Anywhere you go, you're talking about 2.5%, 3% organic matter. And when you go around the state or go other places, then you hear about 0.5% and 1%. So I feel like we are taking the soil for granted in Iowa. But it matters. You need to have high organic matter. How about improving soil health? Again, this is something we don't see. It's not very tangible enough for us because we don't know how to measure of what's happening. But I'll show you some tools that will help about measuring microbial biomass in the soil, knowing about the diversity of microorganisms in the soil. So if you know what's happening, maybe you'll buy more into using cover crops. Definitely nitrogen addition. Organic growers depend on compost, manure, and also cover crops. Nitrogen fixing cover crops to enhance nitrogen in the soil. And of course, reducing soil erosion. We have these catastrophic rain events that happen in Iowa now in the spring. You'll get about 2 inches of rain in an hour. And if you don't have the ground covered with some sort of cover crop in the spring, all that good Iowa soil is in the ditches or in the river. So we need to protect our soil, and cover crops play a major role in that. I mentioned about many benefits while we were talking, adding organic matter, reducing erosion, windbreaks. This is something, maybe it's, when I was talking to Lynn, he mentioned about high velocity winds here in Oklahoma. So can cover crops be used at windbreaks for sensitive crops such as carrots and onions? So in Michigan, when I was doing my PhD, many of the growers growing on muck soil would use that, would use barley or cereal rye as windbreaks for their carrot and onion crops. Definitely nitrogen, cover crops will help to reduce soil compaction as well. When you're driving your machinery over and over again, you need some to reduce that bulk density. Nutrient cycling. We think of legume to fix nitrogen, but we also need to acknowledge that when you're planting these grasses, in the winter, they are holding on to the nitrogen. They are not letting that nitrogen leach away. So that's the benefit of using a cover crop for cycling purposes. And of course, not all cover crops are, it's not always a rosy picture. Some cover crops can attract pests. For example, the armyworm. In the spring, when we have a heavy residue of rye, especially in the conservation tillage system, when you have rolled the cover crop down, you see an influx of armyworm in there because that's the only thing green in spring in Iowa at that time. So we do have some issues with pest interactions with cover crops too. So you need to be careful about that. So it's not, what I say is not always rosy. There are pluses and minuses, but most of the time cover crops come out ahead in whatever use you want to use them for. There are challenges too. I want to put it right in front. Seed costs for cover crop, and we are thankful to NRCS with their EQIP program that they are subsidizing some of the cover crop costs, but the costs are going up. I remember 2011, a 50-pound bag of cereal rye would cost about $10 to $11, but now the same 50-pound bag is about $19. So it's almost double the cost in 8 years. Management costs. You plant your cover crop, but you need to manage it. You might need to mow it. You might, in some cases, need to fertilize it. So in the southeast portion of Iowa, we have very sandy soils, about 0.5% organic matter. And if any grower, an organic grower, seeds cereal rye to protect the soil in the winter, and you don't have enough nitrogen in there or nutrient in there, that cover crop is not going to grow. So there are some nutrient inputs needed depending on what kind of soil you are in. Planting, management costs for terminating the cover crop. How do you incorporate? Do you have a disc? Many homeowners also, I interact with them too, and they are very enthusiastic about using cover crops in their gardens and backyards, but they don't think of the exit strategy of how are they going to kill this cover crop? How are they going to terminate this cover crop? Because when spring comes, they want to plant their tomato, and there's cereal rye standing there. Now, how do I kill this? Do I need to cut it or chop it? So always think of an exit strategy before you choose a particular type of cover crop. It can, as I indicated, it can interfere with planting. If you plant some, like for example, cereal rye in the fall, and you want to plant an early season crop such as an onion or a carrot or a lettuce, and you want to shape your beds in the field, it might be a little challenging if you don't know how to terminate it. One of the most important and clear-cut advantage of having cover crop is it helps to build the soil organic matter. If your soil organic matter range from anywhere from 0.5 to 1%, over a period of year, doesn't happen in 1 year. If you grow cover crops for multiple years, you can slowly bring that organic matter up. And we have seen that in our experiments. We have gone all the way from 1%, especially in the sandy soils, to almost 2% in about 3 or 4 years, with a lot of input using cover crops. So, and the way it works is when you have that biomass which the cover crop produces, you till it under. It not only benefits the soil in terms of structure and physical attributes, but it also helps the microbes in the soil, the fungi, the earthworm, the bacteria, and we need them. Not all of them are bad in the soil. There are some bad bacteria, there are some bad fungi and nematodes, but we need to keep this diverse population in there and feed them. So this organic matter feeds these microorganisms, and in the process you have humus. That is I sometimes call it the very dead portion of the soil. During this process, you have nutrients that are released that can be taken up by the next crop. And that's how adding organic matter helps with cycling of the nutrients. Not just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but many of those micronutrients which are needed for vegetable production. Especially if you're growing cabbage or cauliflower, they are more susceptible to boron and manganese. So having this cover crop helps to keep the concentrations up. What would be typical window of where we can seed cover crops and integrate them in our production systems? So this is more typical to Iowa. You might want to extend this window a little bit up to here, just because you are a little bit more higher in temperature. You don't get your killing frost maybe until November. Our killing frost is this coming weekend, so it's going to be in 28 degrees. So most of the crops will be done this weekend. But this is the main period where growers will grow their cash crop. You don't want to interfere there, especially in Iowa where you don't have that many growing degree days and time. We want to capitalize that to grow our cash crop. It could be any of the vegetable a grower want to grow. But is there a window to put a cover crop right before your cash crop? And there are certain cover crops, and we'll talk about that can go in that window. Or typically what the growers would do is once they finish their cash crop, they will plant cover crops after that. And that's more typical. And that's what most of the growers, organic or conventional, would do at their farm. This is unique, and many of our growers have slowly moved into this direction, especially if you don't want to grow the same crop, a long duration crop in the summer. For example, tomatoes or pepper, which take almost the entire growing season, or sweet corn, which can be succession planted. But is there an opportunity to put cover crops during the peak summer? Even though Iowa is a northern tier state, you might imagine that it's always cold out there, but that's not the case. July and August are really, really hot, and we can't grow any of these cool season crops at that time. If you planted your broccoli late in the spring, and if you're harvesting your broccoli into end of June and July, the quality of the head is really poor just because of the heat we have in July and August. So we finish as a grower, can we finish some of our crops here? And then we have a window of about a month to month and a half. And then we plant our fall cash crops, so fall vegetable crops. So is there an option to put cover crops in the middle? I don't suggest this to growers who are just getting into cover crops, because it's better to get your feet wet with something like this, where you have your cash crop and the end of the season you put a cover crop. But once you get familiarized with cover crops maybe this is also an opportunity. And what would be those cover crops? What are those summer cover crops that can be planted and provide all the benefits we talked about? Organic matter, biomass, nutrient cycling, nitrogen, and we'll talk about that as we move on. So based on some of our work, some of the cover crops which we found would do okay here, and I just say okay, that's because we are still cool in Iowa at this time. And so you might not get a lot of biomass, but still, some of the mustards, for example, oilseed radish or yellow mustard, we have tried that in the spring. A mix of oats and peas, barley, especially for wind protection for some of the crops, some of the clovers. But again, clovers are expensive. They're more expensive than grass cover crop seed, so we shy away from using some of the clovers. But there is an opportunity here. Again, the growing window is very short. You're talking about only month and a half. And then the grower would plant their summer crop, sweet corn or tomato, peppers. But again, this is more skill-driven, more expertise needed, because again, we don't want the grower to fall in a pit where they planted the cover crop, but now they are finding difficult to terminate it, or it causes interference with the main cash crop. Whenever people try, or growers try cover crop, it's better to start slow, because if they don't like it, they would not, first of all, they would not use it, and then they will tell others also it doesn't work. And we don't want that. We want people to take small steps and understand how cover crops work and then get into it. In the summer, there are some cover crops which we have found very useful in Iowa, and I'm sure that will grow here as well, given the heat. Cowpea is a great example, and we'll talk about that more in detail. Sorghum Sudan grass, 8 to 12, sometimes even 14 tons per acre of dry weight. We're talking about dry weight, that much of biomass you can produce with sorghum Sudan grass. Buckwheat, quick germinator. You put it in the ground, 3 days, it's up. So if you are looking for weed suppression, I would highly recommend buckwheat. Sun hemp, Another warm season cover crop that's grown quite a lot in acreage in Florida. A lot of research in Florida on sun hemp. And we tried that in Iowa. It grows really well. In about 2 months, it will be 6-7 feet tall. And Lynn will show sun hemp to us tomorrow when we visit the research plots here. And I mean, they are way more taller than what they grow up in Iowa. I think they're maybe 10, 12, or maybe 14 feet. And so the plot really looks good. So we'll see that tomorrow when we go there. Some of the millets, now these are new. We tried brown top millet, which is promising, especially for weed suppression. I'll show you more pictures of these cover crops and what we are doing out there at the research station, and also some clovers. And when I talk about clovers, again, they are expensive, so we need to be careful how we use them. We primarily use crimson clover because it grows quickly, and since we are going to terminate it, we don't want to plant something which is expensive. For example, red clovers is about $2 to $2.50 a pound of seed. White clover, $4 a pound for the seed. Crimson is a little cheaper, so why not save money, because you're going to terminate that cover crop soon. So there are options for summer cover crops there as well. Now, it's another scenario where a grower would plant something early in the spring. In April, they might go with onions, peas, beans, or lettuce out there as a production system. Again, this will depend on their market, if they have a market to grow these crops. And then since these crops terminate quickly or they are done early, they don't have to go all the way till September, October, there is more time to plant some cover crops and generate biomass, because you're not going to put any other vegetable after that. This is it at the end of the season. So can there be a rotation in one of the years where you don't have a crop that goes till here? Because if you have a cash crop that goes till here, then you have limited options of what you can grow just because of the winter. But in this case, sorghum Sudan, wheat, I know Oklahoma grows a lot of wheat, oats and peas, mustards and clovers, and in Iowa, they all winter kill. We are talking about 20 below zero, 25 below zero temperatures for 1 week, 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. So nothing will survive. These all will winter kill. So easy to manage because they are when you come back there in the spring. And then this is the most typical one, and the most easy format to get into cover cropping is you have your cash crop the entire season and go back. This is mostly for Iowa, but go back with something that will not winter kill, will cover the ground: cereal rye, wheat, hairy vetch, which is a legume, triticale, which is a cross between triticale, which is wheat, and cereal rye. And so it's called triticale, and that's a very promising cover crop up there because it overwinters, it doesn't die that quickly. You can use annual ryegrass too, but the establishment is not very even, and sometimes it's challenging to terminate the annual ryegrass. If you're a conventional grower, you might use a herbicide, but some of the annual grass cultivars and varieties are showing resistance to herbicides. So growers are a little bit more cautious about using annual ryegrass, but you can plant that here at the end of the season too. And I tell, that's not a limitation. You can seed cover crops fairly easily. In this experiment, what we are doing is we're just hand seeding. We're just broadcasting, and then I would come with a rake for the small plot like this. This is an experimental plot, so you have many small plots with different cover crops, but we just come with a rake and we just rake that seed in. So it can be established very comfortably just by hand seeding and broadcasting. You don't need to have a drill or a drop seeder. So that should not be an excuse for not planting cover crop seed that, I don't know how to plant. Over the years, I have adopted this technique. This is a drop down seeder. It's actually a turf seeder. So turf industry uses this quite a lot. Basically, you just dump your seed in there and just walk it. And so if in the next picture, you see my grad student, Maria Bilingi. This is from this year. We are seeding some of our summer cover crops in June, and we put a cover crop in there and we just walk with it. It just drops the seed right there, here. This is about 4.5 feet wide. If you feel like, oh, this is too much of walking, what we did is we just added this contraption here so with nuts and bolts. Another grad student did that. And what we do is we hook this to a gator, and then you just pull that. This end. So you have these two ends here and a nut here. If you look at this picture, and these 3 arms just go to back of a gator, and you just drive your gator. So that also is an easy way to seed. And we have found good success. You'll see some pictures later. Cereal rye, a versatile cover crop for our area. As long as the soil temperature is above 38 degrees Fahrenheit, the seeds will germinate. So we have quite a big window because our growers are just getting done this week, and this is October. But the soil temperatures are still up. They are not 38. You can plant cereal rye all the way up till even December, as long as the soil temperature is just above the 38. Produces about 2 to 3 tons per acre of biomass. Typical seeding rates, you might hear 2 bushels or 1.5 bushel, anywhere from 60 to 90 pounds per acre. I prefer a little higher rate if I'm going for weed management, so I might even go 100, 110. And tomorrow I'll talk about that in the conservation tillage aspect. And then you can plant all the way into late fall. Cereal rye looks like this in the summer, and this is sometime in the middle of May. And you can see it's really tall. It is in anthesis, which means that the flowers, the pollens are flying. And we wanted this because we want that biomass to suppress the weeds during the growing season. So let's see if this video works. And now the challenge is, if you have this much of a cover crop biomass, how would you terminate this? A small mower won't do this job. So you definitely want to use some sort of a flail mower. This is the flail mower we use to terminate that cover crop. And I mean, it's heavy duty. You will see what it does. So you'll see that flail mower just chops through that rye. And then just leaves the residue right down there. So that 4 to 5 feet tall rye So now there are many options. Once we are done with this, we can either strip till and just go make strips and plant our vegetables in there. If we feel like, no, we want to just disc it and put our plastic, we can do that too. But this way, we got a lot of biomass, we got a lot of weed suppression early in the spring up till May, and then we have some weed suppression throughout the season. Not all the way till the end, because once you shed the cover crop, it will slowly disintegrate. But this is an option if you have cereal rye, which is really, really tall. Benefits of cereal rye. When you try to pull the clump of cereal rye root out, you will see many of these holes. And any idea what this is? Earthworms, right? We want that diversity of not only the microorganisms, but the macroorganisms. And we see research has shown that there are many more earthworms when you have cover crops in your system. Jim Hoorman, who is a colleague of mine from Ohio State, a lot of fungi, mycelia of the fungi. And what they are doing is holding the soil particles together, providing that aggregate stability. That's the advantage of having some sort of cover crop in there, and this is with rye. This picture really stumps me. This is from a colleague of mine, Tom Casper, from USDA ARS lab. And Tom just retired and did a lot of work on cereal rye. He was measuring the depth of cereal rye root. And you can see this is almost 36 inches, almost 3 feet. That's the amount of root that cereal rye is putting into the ground. So yes, you kill the top, but the organic matter has been enhanced just because of those roots down there almost till 3 feet inside the soil. So rye can be used as windbreak. This is in Michigan, one of the carrot growers. He has this barley here, and if you look closer, you see the carrots emerging, and this is providing wind protection, especially when there's a lot of wind and dust particles and soil particles will be slamming this, but with this cover crop on the sides, that won't happen. So you can use that as a windbreak. This is the difference between annual ryegrass and cereal rye, and I'm glad you brought that point because oftentimes people get confused. It's two totally different plants. Cereal rye is Secale cereal, Lolium multiflora. So two different plants. Gets more taller, this is shorter, easy to kill with herbicide or Roller-Crimper, but not easy to kill and has shown some resistance. But that doesn't mean that annual ryegrass is not used. We still use annual ryegrass in the state. But most of it is cereal rye because there is more uniformity and more guarantee that it will overwinter and it will not be dead. Another grass I want to talk about is sorghum Sudan grass. And this is a great grass that loves the heat, produces a lot of biomass. You can see for seed germination, it needs at least 55 degree Fahrenheit soil temperature. So in Iowa, we can typically plant sorghum Sudan grass only in June. We can't plant before that because it will not germinate. It's a warm season crop. About 50 pounds per acre of seeding rate. And again, these seeding rates, these are there in the SARE publications, and they're fairly accurate. You can get those rates from there. It also produces some allelopathic properties, so it can affect the next crop you plant. If you plant the next crop immediately after you terminate the sorghum Sudan grass, and I'll show you an example later on. It's a great soil builder. We are very happy using sorghum Sudan grass, especially in that summer where we can't grow any vegetable, but we can plant a summer cover crop. This is from a 2012 picture I took at the research station, June 20, August 21, 2 months, and we did not mow this at all. We just let it go. And you can see how tall it can easily get 5-6 feet. I tell everyone, this is where I am when my wife is angry with me, because she cannot find me when I'm in there. It's very difficult for her, unless she comes with a flail mower, which I hope she doesn't. but really tall, a good place to hide. Okay, another picture here when the sorghum Sudan grass is growing. Excuse me. This is from Michigan when I was there, and you can see it's just coming up. And this is the time when we'll go and mow so that it can come back again. Oats. Since I want to just focus on the grasses first. So oats, also a good cover crop to grow, a good weed suppressor. Oats don't like the warm weather, so they are more cool season. So we typically plant oats, with some other crops later in the fall. So it could be oats and oilseed radish. That's a good mix, which we see works great in the fall. But if early in the spring, it's a possibility if you want to have something there before you plant a late vegetable crop in the summer. And we have had some good luck growing oats. This is the new cover crop we are trying this year. This is the first year we tried. Teff. Anybody familiar with teff? A few of you. It's a warm season crop. It originated from Africa, and so it's pretty drought tolerant. It produces, this is in 2 months. Oh, thank you, Lynn. Thanks.
You can say.
Oh, thank you. This is in 2 months. We seeded the crop in June of this year, and this picture was taken somewhere in middle of August. So in 2 months, this is what we got using teff. Not a very high seeding rate, only 8 pounds to an acre. And so broadcasting it is a challenge because you have 8 pounds, how do you spread it in an acre? And so we used a drop spreader, and that helped us to spread it evenly because we calibrated a spreader for many of these cover crops. So all we had to do is just drag it with that setting in there. But we got a decent stand, no weeds in there. We are collecting data on how much weeds come out of this plot. Absolutely no weeds because the teff completely smothered the weeds. And then we flail mowed it. The residue can hang on there for some time, so you might have to mow it twice or incorporate it twice, go through with the disc twice or come with a rototiller. So it takes a little bit time to break down, but again, a lot of biomass in that 2-month period. This is something new we are trying. Brown top millet, this is part of the same experiment. So you can see this year we planted, this is one of the grad student project. Maria is focusing on different summer cover crops that can be incorporated in vegetable production for Iowa. Brown top millet, we were happy with it, about 30 pounds to an acre, 2-month growth, no weeds in there. So I was able to keep that plot weed free until I plant my fall vegetable. And in these plots right now we are growing cabbage and beets. And we'll be harvesting them by, I would say, beginning of November, they'll be ready to harvest. And so we're evaluating the effect of these cover crops on the vegetable yield and quality and weed suppression. So brown top millet is also a good contender there. Buckwheat, I talked about buckwheat, which is again a great cover crop to grow, especially if you're looking for weed suppression. It's a warm season crop. It can do okay in the fall, but primarily it's better to grow during the summer period. 2 to 3 tons per acre of biomass. Quick growth is the factor that really strikes out there. It really shines. It comes and germinates very quickly. It can attract beneficials, and we have used that, especially in the border of our fields. If you want to have pollinators come in, we have used buckwheat for that purpose. This is buckwheat. You can see anywhere from 50 to 90 pounds to an acre. We have a nice thick stand, again, no weeds in there. Now it's very critical that we go and mow it at this time, because otherwise this will become seed and the seed falls and it just keeps giving, as you were mentioning about veg. This will keep coming. And so we want to make sure that we terminate it as soon as we see about 50 to 80% of the field is flowering, we'll go and terminate it. So after buckwheat, I want to quickly move over to some of the legumes, because as organic growers, you all are interested to add nitrogen. We need to add nitrogen because you can use compost, you can use manure, but you can only use so much. And so can we use some of the legumes that can help fix the atmospheric nitrogen and help the plants and the soil? So of course, it's a symbiotic relationship between the microorganism and the nodules which are formed in the root system of the legume, and it works great. You can see if you pull a plant out, you'll see these nodules in there that shows that nitrogen fixation was happening. Now, one thing is, if you get a chance to pull these roots out and look at the nodule, just pinch the nodule. Just pinch it. And when you pinch it, it should be reddish in color, pink, gooey texture, because that's when we know that nitrogen fixation is happening. If it was not pink, if the nodule is this big and you pinch it and it's not green, it means that there is something not working. And primarily it could be because the right strain of rhizobium was not there in the soil. So we want to make sure that we have the right strain of rhizobium that nitrogen fixation happens. Nitrogen fixation happens more in soils that have less nitrogen to begin with. You might not see this happening in a soil which is already abundant, has already abundant nitrogen. Hairy vetch, and I know this might have hard seeds in there. This is what it looks like in the spring, and we would go and terminate it at that point. It can fix about 70 to 150. It's a huge range because it depends on the biomass. If you have more biomass, you'll have more nitrogen that will go back into the soil. We usually go with about 25 pounds to an acre for hairy vetch. And again, termination could be a challenge. The reason I wrote that there is because it's very whiny and stringy, and when you mow it, it's not easy. It can get strangled. So I feel like that should not be the first cover crop for you to try, like hairy vetch. It could be something later, but it has its place in fixing nitrogen. So since I know, and we looking at some of the research around, we wanted to document, okay, what is the impact of the right strain of rhizobium in the soil? In Iowa, it's very hard to convince a grower to add rhizobium to their soil. You know why? No, something else. Think about something else. The two crops which we grow, soybeans. So all the farmers will tell, oh, we had soybean back there last year. I don't have to worry because there was a legume before, so the rhizobium is already there. Why should I add rhizobium? And so very difficult for them to convince. But if you don't have the right strain of rhizobium, nitrogen fixation will not happen. Or it will happen on a limited scale. So we did an experiment in which we added, for example, these seeds, we coated them with these rhizobium strains and we put them out, a different type of clovers. And we documented how that affects the root growth and shoot growth of the plant. So rhizobiums are really host specific. So for example, Rhizobium leguminosarum, it forms symbiotic relationship with these plants, peas and vetches and clover. So if you don't have Rhizobium leguminosarum in your soil and you are planting vetch or clover for nitrogen fixation, it will not happen, or it will happen on a very limited scale. Because you can see for soybean, that forms relationship with Rhizobium fredi, not Rhizobium leguminosarum. So that's why we need to put the right two characters in the place so that nitrogen fixation can happen. This is what the difference is. When you grow, this is yellow, Berseem clover. We had crimson, we had red, but in this case, this is yellow clover. Non-inoculated plants, I grew them for the entire growing season. I seeded them beginning of May, and we harvested them by July or almost into August. Just pull the whole plant out. And you can see the non-inoculated plants versus the inoculated plants. So the plots where I inoculated Rhizobium leguminosarum, those clovers did way better in terms of biomass, in terms of nodules, in terms of root surface and area versus the non-inoculated ones. So now I can tell growers, this is what the difference is if you inoculate or you don't inoculate. If you inoculate, you get the benefit. If you don't, you get lesser of the benefit. So that $5 goes a long way to get the benefit of nitrogen. The same picture, I just pulled the plants outside. You can see how small these plants are versus how much of biomass these plants produce. Okay, chugging along. Okay, so that was the visual statistic. This is more of the numbers there. We use 3 clovers: crimson, red clover, and yellow clover. Look at the difference in biomass. Not much. There's a lot of variability in there. But if you look at the nitrogen contribution, red clover gave us about 100 pounds per acre based on the biomass and the nitrogen in the plant. And the crimson and the yellow gave us about 57 to 72 pounds per acre. So this was also an experiment to figure out in our conditions how much of nitrogen does go back when you plow this cover crop into the ground. Between the inoculated and non-inoculated, you can see the difference. If you inoculate, you get about 93 pounds per acre of nitrogen that goes back. Non-inoculated, you get about 62 pounds. So you lose 30 pounds per acre if you're not inoculating it. These are the clovers which are very commonly planted in Iowa. Many of the vegetable growers would use them. Crimson clover, it's a common one. It doesn't overwinter in Iowa. I believe it will overwinter here. It will do that, okay. But in Iowa, it doesn't overwinter. It will winter kill. Red will overwinter. White will obviously overwinter. It's about a 4-year crop. It's a perennial cover crop. A seed is expensive for white clover. You're talking about $3.50, $4 a pound of seed versus red or crimson, which might be $1.50 to $2 a pound. So this is an annual, no overwintering, biennial, and this is more of a perennial. But these are some cover crops that are very commonly used in vegetable production systems. This is Ray Cruzy. He's my grad student. He was my grad student. Now he works for the OSU Extension in Dubuque County. But Ray we were collecting this biomass from these cover crops, and he was spending a lot of time on just one plot. And I was like, what are you doing there? We are moving ahead. And he was actually digging the root of a crimson clover. And I don't know how he did it, but he kept digging. He kept digging, and he pulled this root of this crimson clover plant, and look at the length of that root. And you won't imagine that this crop, which is only this at the top, is almost 3-4 times down in there. So this is a very unique picture. I love this picture because we tend to miss this part. We don't see this, that how deep the roots are going. And so what they're adding to the soil. So there's a lot of organic matter that's in the soil just because of the root system being there. This is a cover crop. This is an experiment I did a long time back, but wanted to show you what the biomass that can be produced using cowpea, another legume. We are still on legumes. You can see no weeds at all. You have to put a higher seeding rate. Anywhere from 80 to 90 pounds per acre. But this is in 2 months, June 20 to August 21, and you can see the amount of cover crop biomass it produced. And we till it under, that nitrogen is in there. And during the growth, it's also fixing some of the nitrogen. Sun hemp. I know a few of you had a discussion about sun hemp. Again, a great cover crop, came out of Florida, and you'll see this tomorrow. This is in Iowa. About 1.5 months after seeding. So this will be end of July. Beginning of August. We put about 35 pounds to an acre, but again, a great cover crop because no weeds there because the cover crops are completely smothered. I want to stress on the fact that using a mix of grass and legume, that's also a good way to do it. You have cowpea here mixed with sorghum Sudan. This is something which we have completely adopted at the research station. Once we are done with the crop, if we don't have anything being planted there, I use this 3-way mix of cowpea, sorghum Sudan, and sun hemp. You can eliminate the cowpea if you want to, but these two form a really good combination because both of them grow tall. And so we are moving over to this mix. This is what it looks like after seeding, and this is our summer cover crop research plot. This was done, the vegetable crop was harvested here in June, so then we went ahead and planted that 3-way mix. This will again smother all the weeds and produces a lot of biomass. I'm going to quickly, a few more minutes.
Yeah, you got 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, so I need to quickly go through the mustards here. These are also a great cover crop, especially for that biofumigation process. You can fumigate the soil using some of these cover crops. And the way biofumigation works is when you have the mustard and you have to crush it before you integrate it, if you are looking for biofumigation. Because when you crush it, what happens is within that mustard plant, that cell, you have two compounds, myrosinase and glucosinolate. When you macerate that cell by crushing or flail mowing, these two compounds combine, and in presence of water, you get isothiocyanate. That is the compound which produces that biofumigation. That's what you need if you want to fumigate your soil. So if you don't crush it, you just come and disc it, you will still get it, but not to the extent which you could. So either flail mowing or some kind of chopping or mowing and then integrating it into the soil will provide maximum benefit in terms of isothiocyanate. Okay. About 3 to 4 tons an acre. Their seeding rates is not very high, 7 to 10 pounds per acre. I usually tend with the 10 pounds per acre. Again, you don't want it to go to seed because otherwise it will become a weed. You can see some of the mustards, oilseed radish, oriental mustard, yellow mustard, brown mustard. So there are different varieties or cultivars or species within mustards. It's not just oilseed radish. And so you may want to buy something which is a little cheaper. Or you might want to just focus on oilseed radish because you want that long taproot system. So you make your decision based on how you want to spend that money and what you want to get out of that cover crop. This is a commercial grower, celery grower in western Michigan, and he has completely adopted oilseed radish. And this is a 25-acre celery farm. Ron Eading, western part of Michigan. He was having issues with nematodes in the soil, and so he moved into this. Yellow mustard, cover crop that can produce that biofumigation. We have done some work in the high tunnels, if you are a high tunnel grower, to see if we can suppress weeds and add organic matter and suppress some of the nematodes and pathogens by biofumigating. So this is oilseed radish back there. This is yellow mustard. I want to show you, this is a control plot. We did not put a cover crop. There are a lot of weeds in that plot. But if there was a yellow mustard growing in that plot, there might have been those seeds, but they did not grow at all because they got smothered or they did not germinate, or they just got fumigated just because of the biofumigation compounds they produce. So very low weed pressure in there. And you can see the numbers here. Control plot, the amount of weed biomass versus oilseed radish and yellow mustard. Again, I take this to the grower and I work with growers because we want growers to adopt this and make a difference. So there are many growers in Iowa who are very enthusiastic about this. He's a vegetable grower, Greg Reinhardt. He is now using yellow mustard and oilseed radish in his production system. We have John Crowell. He loves the oilseed radish and buckwheat. He's a big proponent of buckwheat. And this is his buckwheat plot. We did an on-farm trial. This is from that. Look at the buckwheat field. Again, 3rd June to 16 July, 1.5 months. That's the growth you get from buckwheat. Look at the control plot right next to his buckwheat plot. And so either he had to use a herbicide or he has to cultivate to keep those weeds down. But these plots didn't do anything. After this, he came and planted his cabbage. And so it was good for him to see, oh yeah, I can see the difference. This is my buckwheat plot and this is my no cover crop plot. And so it was an easy decision for him to make. I want to show you the cover crop biomasses that can be generated from different cover crops, sunflower included, cowpea, sorghum Sudan is always the higher, millet is up there. Some growers might even use soybean, leftover seeds as cover crop. Anything that is there, you can use it. Sun hemp also up there. So just a range, integrating cover crops between the rows. What if you have plastic mulch, you're growing tomatoes, what can you do in the middle? There are options there too. And what we have slowly moving towards, so you can see this is in the beginning of the season. As the season progresses, you see the purslane slowly moving in and it's kind of covering this. So what we have gone to is the grass legume mix. And this is an on-farm trial with a grower. What we did here, we seeded annual ryegrass and red clover, 20 pounds per acre, 20 pounds per acre of red clover. And you can see he has to mow, he has to keep it down, but it's a great way he can go and harvest even if it rains. And again, next year what he will do is he will rip this and this tomato row will be here. So there's some nitrogen already built in there. So Billy is very happy with this mix. We are very happy with this 2020 mix. Of course, you need to think about when to seed. So in this case, he seeded soon as he laid the plastic. We have a short growing season, so we need to make use of that time. Compaction issues due to machinery, because if you plant the cover crop and you're using a water wheel to plant, that tractor is going over the cover crop. If you plant early the cover crop would be okay, but if you plant late after laying the plastic, the tires can damage the cover crop. Obviously, moisture is important. There need to be some rain event. after that cover crop is seeded, because otherwise the emergence is not equal, not even. So we always say, look for the rain event and seed just before it, and try to maximize. Past season weed pressure, if there were a lot of weeds here last year, it might not work that year, but hopefully next year it will work. So don't get disheartened that, oh, it did not work. Maybe because there was a lot of weeds there to begin with. And you have to maintain, you have to mow it to keep that down. I'm not going to talk about this. There is an extension publication, and again, you will have it in your PDF. Me and Tom Casper worked on this, and we came up with different suggestions based on what we have done at the research station. So this is a 5-year rotation of vegetable and cover crop. So again, this is a more idealistic, but you can make it work. You can tweak it a little bit here and there depending on the planting date, but this gives you options. This is one 5-year rotation, this is another 5-year rotation, example 3, example 4, example 5. So 5 examples of how to integrate vegetables and cover crops. Just want to reiterate the fact that there are differences in yield under diverse cropping systems and cover cropping systems. Some might affect the yield of the vegetable, but most of them help to help the organic matter. Again, it's a dynamic system. We need to think about the biology. There are many things in the soil in the play. This is what the microbes do in the soil. They stabilize aggregates, pathogen suppression, nutrient cycling. And I want to quickly talk about nematodes here. Because when we hear nematodes, we think that they are bad. That's not the case. There are some bad nematodes, the herbivorous, lesion, spiral, spin. There are fungivores that eat the fungus. And there is this class of nematodes in the soil. It's called bacteriovore. It eats the bacteria. Okay? And we want more of that. And I'll tell you why. Imagine a system where you are growing tomatoes, and I'll show you how the nematodes help with nutrient cycling. So there were many happy bacteria in your soil because you are doing cover cropping, you're adding compost. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the bacteria is 5:1. That's standard. So there are many happy bacteria, and then comes the nematode. See the change in the face of the bacteria? Because it's a bacterial feeding nematode. It's going to feed on that bacteria. So the C to N ratio of the nematode is 10:1. That's its body composure. It needs to have a C to N ratio of 10:1. So it needs to add 2 of the bacteria to get that 10. Right? 5 plus 5, 10. But when it eats 2 of this, there is 1 N that is extra. And what happens to that N? It's just released when it poops out, and that nitrogen is now available to the plant. So if there were no bacterial feeding nematodes, you might have a lot of bacteria, but there's nothing to break that nitrogen in that bacteria and make it available to the plant. So that's why we need these bacterial feeding nematodes in the soil that can release the nitrogen that is tied up in the bacteria. So that's what the nematodes do. That's what the bacterial feeding nematodes do. We want them in the soil. This is an experiment with Ron Eading in, again, Western Michigan. Look at the control treatment, no cover crop. Look at the plant parasitic nematodes in that system versus oilseed radish. We see less plant parasitic nematodes when you have in that system. But more interestingly, look at the bacterial feeding nematodes. If you have no cover crop, you have about 383. This is in 100 grams of soil. And with the oilseed radish, you have almost 4 times of that. So with this, Ron is able to build that bacterial feeding nematodes up there, and what they will do is they will recycle that nitrogen which is in the bacteria. Cover crops, based on what residue and based on what their root system is, their shoot, they produce chemicals, that can affect many of the microbes in the soil, and that's the interface between cover crops and microbes. They disintegrate, they break down, and they produce compounds that can go out and either feed or sometimes can also affect the population. And that's what we want. We want the bad fungi, the bad nematodes to be affected. We do an analysis in the lab, biolog eco plates, and this shows you the difference of the soil. The more colorful the plate is, the more diversity of microorganisms. So this is a rye and no compost plate. This is a rye vetch and no compost plate. So adding vetch helped, more colors between these two. This is a rye compost plate. Look at the coloration. All the wells are purple colored, which means there is more diverse microorganisms in that soil. When you have rye, vetch, and compost, maybe few more start changing color. So the more diversity we have, rye cover crop, vetch cover crop, compost, the more diversity of microbes versus no compost and just having cover crop. So this is a metric for us to measure the difference. This is the negative aspect of a cover crop. If you have sorghum Sudan grass in the summer, you flail mow, you till it under, you come and immediately plant your lettuce. This is the control plot. The lettuce is still growing. Look at this plot in which there was sorghum Sudan grass. So these are some allelochemicals and tie-up of that nitrogen that is affecting. So the cover crop can affect the growth of the vegetable. We have tried some cover crops between the row. This is cucumbers. And I thought, let's put some cover crops in the middle of the row to attract beneficials for pollination, right? It's not a good idea. Especially for yellow mustard, not a good idea. Because you know what it attracted? Cucumber beetles. It attracted cucumber beetles. So maybe nothing which is yellow in color. And then if you think of it, don't you put that yellow sticky traps? So it's just like the insects are attracted to the yellow and they're coming for the... I said, oh, this was a bad mistake of putting yellow mustard. Buckwheat could be an example. Yeah, buckwheat could be an example, but not yellow mustard. So I learned my lesson with this. But again, soil building processes, it's a complete package, not just cover crop. There is crop rotation you need to think of, and that's why I showed that table. Compost, no-till systems, how you manage your irrigation. Everything is in the mix when you're talking about sustainable soils and organic production. And then they all need to work together, and if they do, then we have a biologically active soil. And that helps to keep that momentum going, keep that nutrient cycle, have that biodiversity, and have that yield what we are looking for, and keep our systems more sustainable.